In this video, I'm going to quickly review some of the causes of the American Revolution. This is meant to be just a review of some of the things that you may have learned about in 5th grade before we start our U.S. government unit in 6th grade. To start, we're going to start with a vocabulary word. The word that means a complete change in ways of thinking, working, or living is the word revolution. This is a word that you're going to see when we talk about the American Revolution, but it's also going to be something we look at later when we talk about prehistory and history and hunters and gatherers and farmers. There's different revolutions that happen throughout the course of history. This revolution is going to involve the British and the colonists. Another vocabulary word that I'm going to use throughout this summary is the word colony, which means a group of people in one place who are ruled by a parent country elsewhere. So we're going to look at the 13 colonies. 13 colonies are pictured in this map. This map shows that there were some points and some places that were claimed by both the British and the French, and this leads into the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War. I'm not going to describe this too much, but the most important thing is after this war, the British stayed as including some soldiers in the colonies to help protect the colonies. But it was an expensive thing to have people come over the Atlantic Ocean and to stay and live in the colonies. So one of their solutions to this expense, we are going to talk about taxes. A tax is a required payment to a local, state, or national government. The first tax that I want to mention is the Stamp Act. This was a tax on all paper documents. All sorts of things required the colonists to pay extra to have this stamp put on it. If they were buying newspapers or playing cards or pamphlets, getting a diploma, all of those things required a stamp, which was an extra tax for the colonists. This was to try to help raise money to pay back some of those expenses from the war. Repeal is another vocabulary word that I'm just about to use. It means to cancel a law. As you can imagine, the colonists did not appreciate being taxed on all sorts of things, so they protested the Stamp Act, and the British repealed the tax after, and this is a very brief summary, lots of different things transpired here, different ways of protesting, but the British did eventually repeal the tax. And then they started a new one. So they said, oh, let's put a brand new tax. This one is the Townshend Act, and it taxed things like glass, wine, lead, printing ink, tea, all sorts of things that the colonists might buy from the British. There's a tax. And we have this again. The colonists did not appreciate being taxed, and the colonists protested these taxes. They boycotted the British items. They destroyed these things. They may have threatened or even harmed the tax collectors. And then the British repealed the tax again. The colonists had this saying, no taxation without representation. They were being taxed on all of these things without a say in the British government. Right? They were just a colony. They did not have any representation. This leads to some tension. The British soldiers that are there in the colonies lead to this Boston Massacre. 5 people died in this Boston Massacre. You can watch other videos that describe this in more detail. But this was the beginning of this revolution. Also the Boston Tea Party. Another thing, we could do a whole unit on just the Boston Massacre and Boston Tea Party. But as a quick review, the colonists, the patriots, wanted to really show the British they were not going to pay this tea tax. They threw the tea overboard, destroying property, destroying the tea. And you can imagine the British not so happy about that. They wanted to punish those colonists. They said, we're going to send more soldiers. You're going to have to pay back for all of that tea that you just destroyed in Boston Harbor. Massachusetts, you're not going to pick your own type of government. The port in Boston is closed until further notice. You're not going to have public meetings, all sorts of things to try to have people obey the king. Patrick Henry has a couple of quotes as one of the patriots, one of the founding fathers. Give me liberty or give me death. And the other one says, the distinction between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englanders are no more. I am not a Virginian, but an American. Here's where the colonists are really joining together. Instead of being 13 individual colonies, they said, we are going to be united, and we're going to stand up for ourselves. Then the British and the colonists both build their own military type of defenses. Colonists, you might hear or have heard about the Minutemen. And the military builds up, the tension builds up, and this leads to war. In this video, I'm not going to cover the American Revolutionary War, but this gives you an idea of some of the things that happened that led up to the war. And what we are going to start with in social studies this year are what are some of the things that came out of the war once the 13 colonies were independent.